When after 3 days and 3 nights Inanna had not returned, Ninshubar set up a lament for her by the ruins. She beat the drum for her in the assembly places. She circled the houses of the gods. She tore at her eyes, she tore at her mouth, she tore at her thighs. She dressed herself in a single garment like a beggar. Alone, she set out for Nippur in the temple of Enlil. When she entered the holy shrine, she cried out,
"O Father Enlil, do not let your daughter be put to death in the underworld. Do not let your bright silver be covered with the dust of the underworld. Do not let your precious lapis be broken into stone for the stoneworker. Do not let your fragrant boxwood be cut into wood for the woodworker. Do not let the holy priestess of heaven be put to death in the underworld."
Father Enlil answered angrily, "My daughter craved the great above. Inanna craved the great below. She who receives the me of the underworld does not return. She who goes to the dark city stays there." Father Enlil would not help. Ninshubar went to in the temple of Inanna. When she entered the holy shrine, she cried out,
"O Father Nana, do not let your daughter be put to death in the underworld. Do not let your bright silver be covered with the dust of the underworld. Do not let your precious lapis be broken into stone for the stoneworker. Do not let your fragrant boxwood be cut into wood for the woodworker. Do not let the holy priestess of heaven be put to death in the underworld."
Father Nana answered angrily, "My daughter craved the great above. Inanna craved the great below. She who receives the me of the underworld does not return. She who goes to the dark city stays there." Father Nana would not help. Ninshubar went to Eridu and the temple of Enki. When she entered the holy shrine, she cried out,
"O Father Enki, do not let your daughter be put to death in the underworld. Do not let your bright silver be covered with the dust of the underworld. Do not let your precious lapis be broken into stone for the stoneworker. Do not let your fragrant boxwood be cut into wood for the woodworker. Do not let the holy priestess of heaven be put to death in the underworld."
Father Enki said, "What has happened? What has my daughter done? Inanna, Queen of all the lands, holy priestess of heaven, what has happened? I am troubled, I am grieved. From under his fingernail, Father Enki brought forth dirt. He fashioned the dirt into a kurgara, a creature neither male nor female. From under the fingernail of his other hand, he brought forth dirt. He fashioned the dirt into a galatura, a creature neither male nor female. He gave the food of life to the kurgara. He gave the water of life to the galatura. Enki spoke to the kurgara in the galatura, saying, "Go to the underworld. Enter the door like flies. Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld, is moaning with the cries of a woman about to give birth. No linen is spread over her body. Her breasts are uncovered. Her hair swirls about her head like leeks. When she cries, 'Oh, oh, my inside,' cry also, 'Oh, oh, your inside.' When she cries, 'Oh, oh, my outside,' cry also, 'Oh, oh, your outside.' The queen will be pleased. She will offer you a gift. Ask her only for the corpse that hangs from the hook on the wall. One of you will sprinkle the food of life on it. The other will sprinkle the water of life. Inanna will arise." The kurgara and the galatura heeded Enki's words. They set out for the underworld. They set out for the Kur. Like flies, they slipped through the cracks of the gates. They entered the throne room of the queen of the underworld. No linen was spread over her body. Her breasts were uncovered. Her hair swirled around her head like leeks. Ereshkigal was moaning.
"Oh, oh, my inside."
They moaned, "Oh, oh, your inside." She moaned,
"Oh, oh, my outside."
They moaned, "Oh, oh, your outside." She groaned,
"Oh, oh, my belly."
They groaned, "Oh, oh, your belly." She groaned,
"Oh, oh, my back."
They groaned, "Oh, oh, your back." She sighed,
My heart."
They sighed, your heart." She sighed,
My liver."
They sighed, your liver." Ereshkigal stopped. She looked at them. She asked,
"Who are you, moaning, groaning, sighing with me? If you are gods, I will bless you. If you are mortals, I will give you a gift. I will give you the water gift, the river in its fullness."
The kurgara and galatura answered, "We do not wish it." Ereshkigal said,
"I will give you the green gift, the fields and harvest."
The kurgara and galatura said, "We do not wish it." Ereshkigal said,
"Speak then. What do you wish?"
They answered, "We wish only the corpse that hangs from the hook on the wall." Ereshkigal said,
"The corpse belongs to Inanna."
They said, "Whether it belongs to our queen, whether it belongs to our king, that is what we wish." The corpse was given to them. The kurgara sprinkled the food of life on the corpse. The galatura sprinkled the water of life on the corpse. Inanna arose. Salutations from space, folks. This is Gemini Brett, StarryTeller of More Than Astrology, here with another episode of the 13th Flower, the Venus Journey, and it is my great honor to be with Cayelin Castell, co-founder of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School and co-leader of the Venus Alchemy group, along with Tammy Brunk, who we spoke with in the last episode. Cayelin, how in the heavens are you?
I'm really great, and I'm so excited to be here. And I love talking about Venus.
Well, I think I've heard you do so more than anyone else, at least in the way that I love to hear the goddess honored. And that's a wonderful place to start, because there's many different paradigms of astrology, and maybe you could speak to us about how shamanic astrology in this paradigm, visioned forth by Daniel Gemario, and maybe revisioned with your support, how Venus is seen by shamanic astrology.
Yeah, that it's really interesting, because I've been looking at some other ways of approaching the Venus cycle, and primarily they look at evening star, morning star, and evening star Venus, and they start with the sun conjunctions. So the sun conjunct in the underworld, always in the underworld, but as Venus is becoming morning star, or sun conjunct in the underworld as Venus is becoming evening star, and they just go from those 2 points, and that's it. So you're either morning star or evening star, and they don't take into account the underworld time. So, based on the story of Inanna, and this is something that Daniel researched quite a lot back in the mid-90s, we're looking at the Venus cycle as a cosmological, or the Inanna story is a cosmological telling of the Venus cycle. And so where is she in the story? Where is, in this particular story? And we found ways to be very ceremonial with that, to work with each of the phases of the Venus cycle, when she's at different chakra gates, when she's in the underworld, how to be in a ceremonial relationship with that, particularly when it is your own personal 8-year Venus return. But any time is a great time to work with the Venus cycle. So we've been having an incredible deepening experience doing this with groups of people. And what's interesting is that in Sumeria, they actually every 8 years reenacted the entire story as a ceremony, as a cultural ceremony. And so we've been finding ways to do that. Now we can do it online. We can do it across the globe. The technology supports that, so that's pretty cool. And it's very powerful to work with a collective intent, our personal intent, and also collaboration with a greater collective intent, and the journey to into a deep initiation, death and rebirth, and then rising back up out of the underworld, initiated and empowered from that place. So that's what we've been up to.
And Venus too. I mean, some say Venus just is your love or your values or the stuff that you want in relationships, but shamanic astrology has a broader view of the nature of Venus on the birth chart.
Yes, really seen for women as their emerging feminine identity. What aspect of the feminine or what aspect of the goddess is a woman here to explore, to express, to help evolve, because of everything's evolving so quickly right now. For men, it's their connection to the inner goddess, to the inner feminine, to the divine feminine within, the sacred marriage piece they're working with. We're looking at it more from that perspective, and some aspects of Venus, some places where Venus can be, is relational, but some are not. Some are more fiery, independent, warrior-like, warrior meaning that they're committed to a cause that they're going to further, and nothing gets in the way of that, not even a relationship.
So kind of in Jungian terms, Venus as anima.
Yes.
And then also Mars on the other side is animus, so the divine feminine for Venus and the sacred masculine for Mars, regardless of if you're a woman or a man, but they tend to present in different ways, yeah?
Right, and so for women, Mars happens to be their connection to the inner masculine or the divine masculine or their sacred marriage piece. And as Mars for men is their emerging masculine identity, or what aspect of the god they're here to explore, express, help evolve. So yeah, so Mars represents that for, it's like they just sort of switch places depending on what gender you happen to be this life.
I have found, and this is one thing that really drew me to shamanic astrology, that it has been true in my life that as a man, I've kind of projected my Venus onto what I'm attracted to. And we find this is true whether a man is attracted to a woman or a man or both, or to a tree or whatever. And that a woman will often project her Mars. And that, in a way, this is one of the initial initiations of the sacred marriage, of the projection piece. This isn't me, so I need to complete myself from without with this. And typically that patterning leads us to shadow projection. And I like to say the broken mirror is the best reflector in that regard, because when it all falls apart, we say, oh, this thing that I thought they were, they are not. And how do I know they're not that? Oh, because I am that. And we start to connect with it within.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting, that projection piece, because the other person may or may not have anything to do with that archetype at all. But we're seeing them through that lens. And when we can own that for ourselves, then we can really see people, the partner, whoever the partner might be, or whoever the person we're in relationship with might be, for who they really are and not what we're projecting onto them.
This thing that we're so attracted to, looking for completion, actually is an unknown piece of self. And when we find that within, complete ourselves from within, then we can welcome our complement, right? And so in this regard, it's just as important for a man to work with his Venus as it is for a woman, and a woman to work with her Mars as it is for a man. It's just kind of coming from a different angle.
There's something else that you're speaking to here, Brett, that's really important, and that is that sometimes what our Mars for a woman is, or a Venus for a man is, does not actually fit the archetype of what it is we're here to do in terms of our relationship intent. What's our real bottom line for a relationship? And for some, it really is about committed partnership and having the partner be the reflection, and how you learn more about yourself. And for some, it's really about having a lot of space and freedom, and that maybe the partner is somebody who's like a trailmate, there's just or somebody who's supporting a sacred work, as a partner in that regard. So the relationship is important, but not more important than the work. Can be as important but not more important. So there's 6 different relationship paths, and sometimes we might be attracted to someone who's not interested in what we're looking for in terms of our deeper connection through relationship, and how we learn more about ourselves through relationship. So understanding all those pieces can be super helpful.
So when you talk about the 6 different relationship paths, this is working with the ascendant, descendant axis of the chart. And they could be Aries, Libra, Libra, Aries, which in a sense is the same, these 2 polarities. They're Taurus, Scorpio, Gemini, Sagittarius. So only 6 pairs in the 12. And that's a whole different aspect of relationship and the sacred marriage work of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, and something we don't need to get deep into today, I don't think, but just to say also that within those 6 paths there are an infinite amount of combinations, and really seeing the Venus and the Mars in a native's chart is such a profound way to explore the infinite availability within. So you spoke earlier, Cayelin, about the underworld. And how can someone determine if they have an underworld Venus on their chart?
So if people know how to look at a chart and look at degrees between planets, you're looking between the Sun and Venus. And if you are within 10 degrees of the Sun, not retrograde, then that's what we call the Inanna underworld, or the long underworld, where it lasts from anywhere from 60 to 90 days. And then if you have Venus conjunct the Sun within 10 degrees retrograde, then that's the metamorphic underworld, or where the metamorphosis is happening, the shape shift from one expression of the goddess to another. And that's a shorter underworld, lasts about 8 days. And sometimes a little shorter, sometimes a little longer, but that's a quick one. So there's actually less people on the planet with that one than there are with people with the longer underworld, because it's such a short time.
Right, and astronomically speaking, Venus at the end of her cycle from this perspective is an evening star, and even before she retrogrades, she's getting lower and lower in the west, and when she stations retrograde, it's a very quick dive into the beams of the sun, as they said in the ancient days. And this is what we mean by the underworld, that Venus is so close to the sun that she can't be seen. And the general astronomical significator there is if she's within 10 degrees, as Cayelin's saying. And this is what Cayelin's calling this transformational Venus, because she's finished a 19-month quest, so to speak, and she's retrograde, and she's kind of, I like to think of kind of burning off the wisdom even of the last piece, or maybe better said, kind of composting it into the rich soil to plant the seeds for the next cycle. And that's a very quick, usually 7-8 days, a little bit longer, time where she moves from the west, and then she's reborn in the east, and a new cycle begins. That's called her heliacal rise, and she rises up, and then she slowly comes down, now moving from our perspective in the same direction as the sun. Every month the moon comes around, signaling these gates of the goddess's descent, of Inanna's descent, and in the story she removes all of these adornments, and then when she catches up to the sun within 10 degrees, both moving direct, the sun always does, now she's in this other underworld. So the Inanna underworld, you're calling it, or I think true to the story, it's like the Ereshkigal's domain when she's going down there.
Where she goes to meet the dark goddess. It's the place where she's encountering her sister, the dark goddess, and going through a death and rebirth experience, according to the story that's told. And it seems to be that people really have that experience when Inanna's in the underworld, that it feels like it's a death and rebirth time.
Yeah, and so that's a longer time, some cycles longer than others, and in the very middle of the cycle, she reaches what's called exterior conjunction to the sun. She's moving direct, and what this is Venus, Sun, Earth. So she's as far from us as she gets. She's on the other side of the sun. She's completely blinded to our view under the beams, and then she passes, and in some senses she does move from the morning star side to the evening star side, but she's not going to re-emerge for some time after that. But there's this kind of promise at this time in the death and rebirth. And as I've been narrating this story along with Marya Stark and her wonderful music, at the beginning of all these episodes, that's where we are right now. When I interviewed Tammy Brunk in the last interview, and she had just been slayed and hung on these meat hooks, a very harsh part of the story. And now Father Enki, at Ninshubar's behest, has sent helpers, sent the Kagara and the Galatura to resuscitate Inanna with the food and the water of life so that she can come back. And she's resuscitated, but it's still going to take her time before she re-emerges, and astronomically this happens when we see her light again in the west, and then every month the crescent moon joins her in the evening sky, and she retrieves those adornments starting from the root chakra association and finally retrieving her crown, and then she goes back into the metamorphosis stage and does it all again. And this specific underworld, which happened June 6th, 2016, we're recording this 10 days later on June 16th, was a very significant one because she was also on this grand cross. Venus and the Sun in Gemini across the chart, retrograde Saturn in Sagittarius, and on the squares Jupiter in Virgo at the north node and Neptune in Pisces at the south node. So I want to get back into that, but first I want to speak about this underworld time, the nature of death and rebirth. As it is, every 8 years, the Venus cycle that we were born into comes around again, and it is often at this time when Venus is making this kind of death and rebirth move behind the sun where we experience some of that energy in our own lives. So I'm wondering if you can speak, I guess, to maybe some examples where you've seen that, ways that you've seen that come through for people.
Well, I think that oftentimes people feel somewhat powerless during the time Venus is in the underworld, especially if they're in their Venus return. Because it's requiring that we let go, that we surrender, that we die to something, die to who we believe ourselves to be, especially in relationship to the divine feminine, so that we can be empowered and reborn into what we really are. That's kind of the intention of that time. Now, if somebody's born in that phase of the cycle, and the best example I know to use is my husband Peter, who's got Sun conjunct Venus exact at 29 degrees, Gemini. He's in his Venus return right now. And in his life, he was born into a situation where his mother really hated men. He was the only son, and he was the middle son. He had an older sister and a younger sister, and they were both horrible to him. And he really had a hard time with the feminine, especially early in his life. And then his first wife was an alcoholic, and it was a lot of underworld and stuff beyond his control, and that expression of what do you do with that? It's like you can't. He didn't know what to do with that. So interestingly, he has this information now, and he was asking me, what do I do? It's like I have this Venus in Gemini. She wants to play. She wants to have fun. She wants to be free. And then there's this underworld overlay that he has encountered a lot of his life. So we came up with a question for him to work with, and that is, how does the dark goddess have fun? So you can work with the phase that you're born into, maybe come up with some questions to work with and to help you to understand more deeply what that piece might be for you, how is it showing up for you, and how can you more consciously participate with the intention of being born in that phase of the Venus cycle.
And I'm sure the answer to how does the dark goddess have fun is not only slaying her sister and hanging her on meat hooks. That's probably in the story because Ereshkigal was not having fun. In fact, Ereshkigal, we know, was going through a grieving process, and Inanna went into the Kur to join her because Gugulana, the bull of heaven, her husband, had died. And there's all sorts of cosmological themes available there, perhaps a shift from the age of the bull to the age of the ram, from the age of Taurus to the age of Aries back then. I mean, I'm also very interested. I understand etymologically that the horns were related to the same word for illuminated or shining. And this is one of the reasons why Inanna and all of these different Anunnaki gods and goddesses, and maybe Isis and Hathor, and even Moses is shown with horns sometimes in some of the spiritual paintings, that's actually a symbol for their illumination, maybe even a different race of beings who had a particular luster or shine to them, but that's probably another subject. But to speak about this idea of death and rebirth, because it's so profound in, the story, and it's not typically the place that we want to go when we're considering Venus. And, there's a lot of paradigms of astrology, or kind of more like internet and newspaper things, where Venus is just all benefic and all bright and it's all good, and like this isn't even considering death. That's like Saturn and Mars territory, like no way. And I found, and Tammy and I spoke about this a lot last time, and it shows itself in the story as we'll move along, that Inanna courageously descends into the underworld for this transformation, where later her consort Dumuzi kind of has to go be taken kicking and screaming. And the idea that it is our feminine nature, and so I don't mean only women, and men too, that has a little bit more courage to go into the darkness, to have this transformation. I do feel it's reflected in the female biology, just given that the menses is, a monthly death and rebirth in that regard. But, when we're working with people around this time and the potential of the dark night of the soul, however it wants to come in, I mean, examples that I've seen is somebody has like the massive breakup, the love of their life, and of course that needs to clear out, so they see, actually, that was just me finishing some patterns, and now that I've released it, now I'm ready for like a truer love than I ever knew could exist. But loses the love of the life, lives in the basement, right, in the underworld at their parents' house for a time, right? So that's been one of my favorite ones, where it's just like, whoa, that's like very literal. For me in this one, there's been plenty of kind of death and rebirth experiences, but one of the craziest symbols for me of working with the goddess in the underworld is they're digging this gigantic hole out front of my house, doing this whole kind of city landscaping, rainwater project. And so I was just looking at that, and they took out this tree, this beautiful maple tree that I love, to dig this giant hole into the underworld. It's like, this is like too literal. And then speaking of this Grand Cross, then they put a 4-way stop sign right in front of the hole into the underworld. So sometimes these things just really keep knocking on our door. And for me, that's like, oh, am I avoiding in my own Venus cycle, in this time of death and rebirth, am I just talking about this stuff and doing fun interviews and not actually like taking the time and being patient enough to engage with my own process? And that's really come in for me these last couple months of like, no, you got to slow down, you got to stop overproducing so you can be and experience. Yeah.
And part of that is really, well, it's partly facing our fears, but it's also grieving any losses we've experienced, to really feel deeply what we're feeling and to give space for that. Because if we're just constantly running to the next thing, we're kind of avoiding what we're feeling. And the empowerment comes when we can slow down and allow ourselves to really feel what's going on. And yeah, and
there's so many genius strategies for avoidance, right? I mean, one is this isn't happening to me. No, the other, another is just staying very busy and I have to do all this stuff so I don't have to see it happening. Another is to find somebody who's hurting more than you and to just give all your love and healing to them. And right, so I mean, we've all kind of played with these different experiences, and they're true to different archetypes and these kinds of things. Cayelin, I often think when about kind of the death and rebirth and working through that, my own life's experience and transformation and holding space for a lot of clients that are in that zone. I often think about this story that you shared with me on a hike with a women's group, I believe in Arizona. You know the story that I'm talking about? When you guys came across like a young woman who had very recently died? Yeah. Would you share what happened there? Because I think it's a cool window to open in this conversation.
Right. So we were doing an event at Faywood Hot Springs. We'll be doing one again come this September, looking at the synodic cycles, kind of what we're talking about here around Venus, but we'll also be looking deeply into Mars and Mercury. And we were doing this, and this was back in 2000. And there was a woman who had signed up to come, and the first night she wasn't there. So I went to ask to see, if she had checked in yet. And I woke up the person that was, he was just like, can I look in the morning? I said, sure. So next morning she wasn't at our meeting again. So Daniel went to check. And they said, yeah, she checked in. She's in campsite number 2. Daniel went over there, didn't see her, came back, said, it's a mystery, what's happened to her? And her name was Miriam. And we're, of course, at a hot springs where, Miriam was the one that called up the waters, right? Somebody's sister. Can't think of his name. Anyway, so I'm sitting there thinking, and Daniel is starting to talk about the synodic cycles or whatever he's talking about, but I kept thinking, I have to go check her campsite. And I don't know why, because Daniel had just said that he'd been there and didn't see her. Finally, the urge to go was so strong, so I got up and I walked over there, and I thought I saw her sitting in the front seat of her car. I kind of did a double take, and I was kind of confused, and I was going to walk around by the passenger side to go look in her tent, but something drew me around to the driver's side of the car, and I saw her slumped over dead in her car, and she had purple all around her mouth, and so I knew she'd been there for a while, and I was just like, put my hand over my heart. I'm like, oh my God, she's dead. And then I'm thinking, what do I do? And I'm like, okay, I got to go tell somebody. So I went to the office and told the person, and they brought out the coroner, and the police came, and it was pretty intense. But we also had a shamanic sound healer in this group, and we had a shaman in this group, and so we were able to do ceremony for her to help send her on her way. And so it was pretty powerful. And I had never seen a dead person before. Well, maybe I'd seen actually had seen 2 dead people before, but they were my parents, I went to die. So it was there in their death process, but this was like not expected, totally unexpected.
So I wonder if this is the same story, because what I remember is you telling me that you had kind of broken out in this like uncontrollable like wailing.
Yes, that did happen when we did the shamanic ceremonies to send her soul on, and I found myself with this deep well of grief and just like keening, how the the women would keen for those who had died. And I found myself doing that. And I was kind of embarrassed because I'm a co-leader and I don't want to be doing it. But luckily, the woman standing next to me got behind me and she was holding me and she was whispering in my ear and she's like, go for it. She was really encouraging me to go for it. And I found myself feeling like I was grieving for the whole entire group. Everybody was so shocked and stunned and, taken aback by this. It brought up a lot for everyone. And so, but people weren't expressing. They weren't expressing what they were feeling. So I felt like I was the feelings for everybody.
And that's so beautiful. And I think I remember you told me hearing, or at least I heard this, that you're doing this for all of us and you're doing this for her.
Yeah.
And I remember it led me at that time into these contemplations of death and birth and these two gates, at the end and the beginning of the end or whatever for all of us, where... Yeah, and that's why there's like the wailing, Italian women at the procession, or even that's why there's the wild Irish wake. It's to bring this energetic current to help a soul transition into the next place. And that later led me to, this is like what labor pain is about, right? Because we're also giving the opportunity for a soul to kind of come in on that incredible energetic current that, frankly, a man's never going to understand, to help that soul come into being, and I think it's just that contemplation in itself, because I'm often, when I'm facing the fear of death, really asked to see it as a birth and this nature of transformation. And this, I think, too, one of the beautiful lessons I learned in that story when you first shared it with me and contemplating is that, right, that when there is this death in the air, like, how can we celebrate it in such a way that the essence of transformation can be born? And I would love to think that that's how the dark goddess has fun. You know what I mean?
Right? And if that means we're screaming and crying and wailing and keening and, really using our voice to express whatever that's about, that sound, like you're saying, the sound helps the soul too. And that's why I think ancient cultures and even current cultures still do that. Something we've kind of lost in our Western culture, but...
Right, and the death of grieving is the birth of, death as something we are meant to fear and not to see it as this great gate of transformation and entrance into some mystery even beyond the mystery of this Earth game, or perhaps a return, or who knows, and that's the point of why it actually can be a very fun thing.
And I will tell you, too, that I did a grieving ceremony with Sabanfu Somé. She's married to Malidoma Somé, and she teaches this process that they do in her tribe in Africa. And they create altars, one for protection, one for the ancestors, and one for where you place your grief. And then they grieve for everything. They grieve for the children. They grieve for those who have died. They grieve for those who have had pain or sickness or trauma or anything. It's like they just list off all these things they're grieving for. And so when I did that, I was like, oh man, I don't want to do this. But I found myself doing it, and I also knew that I was going to be grieving for everybody. Again, I just had this feeling that it was going to happen. So when I went to the altar, I had a friend of mine go with me, had somebody go with you, and I just asked her to hold me, and I just, again, started keening and wailing, and, people were being kind of quiet and they're grieving, and I just went for it. And everybody then started to feel they had more permission to go for it for themselves. And oftentimes that kind of deep grief can feel exhausting. But what happened was I actually had a Kundalini activation. And when it was all over, I was totally energized. I was like, this is why people grieve. This is why people go into that deep process, and especially in ceremonial group energy. Whoa, that was powerful. So, and it feels really good when you get to that point. It doesn't start out feeling as good, but we got it. Yeah. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah, and there's a difference of grieving for people of like, oh, I'm just going to take all your energy on and deal with it, or being that powerful presence who's not afraid to express for the benefit, even as giving ourselves permission to do that as an example that will help others give themselves permission to do that. And I think it's a really fun way to transition into this next question, which is to ask about, okay, well, Venus by sign on your chart, an image of the divine feminine that you're here to develop a connection to, who will be a guide for you to get to where you're going from where you're coming from and all that good stuff. But why also look at Venus by phase? So you mentioned Peter, your husband, who has the Gemini Venus and this playful young jester, trickster, service to the truth of eternal youth in these, but she's in the underworld. So by phase, there's also that kind of dark goddess and death and rebirth initiation. And this is the thing where when Cayelin mentioned shamanic astrology at Feywood Hot Springs, in the fall, we'll be doing a synodic cycles journey. When we look at these synodic cycles, like these longer cycles, we're able to zoom out of the frame of the film that our birth chart is and look more at the scene, the global picture. I think an easy way maybe for folks to see this at first is to look at your moon and your sun. Like I have a Gemini moon and a Scorpio sun. But then where was the new moon before your birth? Right? And mine, for example, was in Libra. So, I don't hear people talking about that often, but that's when we get together and have these like seed planting and intention setting ceremonies and stuff. So, like, the hippies were doing that in Libra in the cycle that I was born into. And I don't see that in a Scorpio sun and a Gemini moon. I have to rewind to see, okay, what was the scene that I was born within? And then for Venus, you will go back to when she is retrograde conjunct the sun before your birth. Okay, so that is the interior conjunction in a sense when she's getting like the imprint of what her cycle will be. But shamanic astrology works as the Mayans did, as the Sumerians did, it would seem, according to their records. Not just at that moment, but when then Venus is first seen. So she's now retrograded past the sun to 10 degrees about, so that she can rise and we can see her light, and that's called her heliacal rising, and that's when the cycle begins. So in this current cycle, we're recording this in 2016 in June. On August 15th, 2015, it was Venus retrograde interior sun, so it goes Earth, Venus, Sun. But about 7 days later, on August 22nd, was her heliacal rise, both in the sign of Leo. So this is this Leo cycle. So regardless of where Venus is within these 19 months, about 584 days, from her heliacal rise in Leo in 2015 until hers in what will be March of 2017 in the sign of Aries, regardless of what sign she's in, we're committed to this Leo investigation for the goddess energy, yeah?
Yes, it's like we call it an overtone, or we could say it's the meta goddess that you're connected with or you're working with. So everyone's born with an overtone or a meta goddess energy. So that's really helpful to know. And then to know whether you're a morning star or an evening star or one of the underworlds, either the Inanna underworld or the metamorphic underworld. If you're a morning star or evening star, what chakra gate might you be at? And in the morning star, she's making her descent, so she's releasing the vestments that represent those chakras. And as the evening star, she's reclaiming, so she's taking back those vestments as she comes back up out of the underworld. And when she's releasing, we like to see it as releasing any distortions or things that need to be let go of in relationship to that chakra energy. And then when she's reclaiming, it's like reclaiming a healthy relationship because she's gone through the death and now she's being reborn and she's resurrecting up out of the underworld and, kind of going through an ascension process. So we can work with it from that perspective, but it's very interesting to know what gate you were born into, and that gives you some additional information. Now, not everybody's born at a gate. If you're born in the underworld, you're not at a chakra gate, that's for sure. And even if you have a morning star, evening star, it may depend on whether Venus has gone direct yet, if it's morning star, because she won't make her first conjunction with the moon as part of the descent until after she goes direct. And then if it's an evening star, but she's retrograde, then she's past all the gates, and she's doing the final synthesis of that particular cycle and preparing for the next cycle. So,
for folks out there, if that sounds like way too technical and that kind of thing, you can check out the previous episodes of this, and one that on this series that's called "What is a Venus Synodic Cycle?" because I'm showing a lot of this stuff. So, Cayelin, let's put ourselves on the spotlight, and I'll start. I have Venus in Virgo. My Mars is in Cancer, and the old systems would say that's where they're both in their fall, so this is why I like the newer paradigms. But I look at that stuff, and the Mars in Cancer, well, this outgoing energy, the masculine energy as like good father, but then the attraction to Virgo, the priestess, the sacred space keeper, the one who is devoted to her sacred work. And the way that that's manifested in my world, and this is why when I read the Shamanic Astrology Handbook, I was like, yeah, this is real, is that, there's this attraction in me to this very independent kind of priestess. I mean, before I came into like shamanic communities and that kind of thing, it was more like people so devoted to their sacred work, which was like career, right? And that's fine. Maybe that's sacred for them, but it's kind of transitioned, especially as I'm finding it within. But, to these very independent people who need their space. And then I'm coming in with this kind of mothering Cancer energy, which for them became smothering, right? And so just train wrecks, right? And then that, in the sacred marriage is then connecting to my own inner Virgo. I mean, she's kind of hanging up here on this wall. And finding my way into tea ceremony and these different things that I do to have that sacred space and that priestess within. And that's not as much where I wanted to go with this, but to speak about the overtone. I was born into this Leo cycle that we're currently in. They come around every 8 years. I turned 40 in October of 2015. So this is my 5th Venus synodic return. And given that it was in October and it started in August, I'm very young in the cycle. Yeah, my Venus is at her maximum brightness as a morning star. And my Venus is in Virgo, but it's a Leo cycle. So my question always is then, okay, how is my particular connection to initiations with and through the Virgo goddess in service to this global essence of the emerging Leo goddess? And then we can look at where in the cycle was I born. I'm born pretty young in the cycle. Is that an immaturity statement? That, probably that's not a great like one-to-one delineation. Has there been some of that experience? Possibly. But where she is in the vestments is she's removed the crown and she's coming down into the third eye. And I really see that given that this Leo cycle, and I'm going to show this either in this interview or in the next episode, historically came from 100 years as a Virgo cycle. And that in and of itself, then perhaps part of my role in the connection with the Divine Feminine is to remind this emerging queen, which is one of the ways that we can describe the solar feminine, the radiance of the Leo goddess who's coming online, to keep it sacred, to keep it Virgo. And if you just think about that symbolism of let's take the crown off and kind of get into this like spiritual center and see what we have to cleanse, that really speaks to me in that regard.
That's really beautifully said. And that is important, and people will be born in one of 5 overtones. Actually, they've been shifting, so there's, it's shifting into new ones, but you were probably very close to the very first.
I was the very first one by heliacal rising, 1975. The one in 1974 was the first Capricorn cycle that had come from Aquarius because they go retrograde. A good way to see this is this pentagram that you see behind Cayelin's head over there. Right? This symbol that's been so demonized by the church and stuff because it's the symbol of goddess. Why? Because Venus traces this path over the course of 8 Earth years through the zodiac. These alignments of Earth and Venus and the Sun make the 5-pointed star. It's near perfect. That's a conversation for another time. But therefore, she'll only, in these meta feminine or goddess overtones, be exploring 5 different archetypes at a time. And in our current time, they are Gemini, Capricorn, Leo, has been Libra, or Scorpio, about to become Libra. And we'll have one more Aries cycle that will become Pisces. I spoke those last 2 out of order, but that's okay. So the pentagram itself, 5 of these kisses, which happens over the course of 8 Earth years and 13 Venus years, slowly retrogrades through the signs. So this current Leo cycle, that if you honor the star point as heliacal rise began in 1975, was Virgo. And they're about 104 years on average per sign. Before that, it was Libra. And so this particular cycle came from Libra, went to Virgo, and now moved into Leo in 1975. And, you know, if this emerging queen essence of Leo, I love telling this, that 1975 times Man of the Year was Women of the Year. It was still called Man of the Year, right? But Women of the Year. And on my birthday, October 24th, 1975, and I was born with Venus in her maximum brightness in the morning, there was this walkout of women in Iceland away from the home and the babies, so the fathers would have to come home and express some tenderness and this kind of thing. And it's, you know, in this essence of Leo, fire, solar, feminine, and this queen nature saying, hey, look, we're not just here to, like, fold your sheets, buddy. Like, we've got something to do. And it's, as I like to say, the roaring lioness, you know, and the sovereign scepter. But how can that essence emerge but keep it sacred and remind perhaps royalty, Leo, that it is in service and stewardship of the earth itself? Virgo is 2 of the ways that I like to think of that, yeah. And maybe in the feminine nature of Virgo, and which can be renunciate, like virgin doesn't mean chastity, but there is something about holding my own sacred space. And the Leo calling to come out into play and radiance in that regard, a little bit of resistance that would keep me from charging straight into that. Who's to say? So I think I'll get back to this Leo cycle, but what about you, Cayelin? Where were you born? What's the overtone, and where were you born in the cycle?
Well, I'm an evening star, so I was late in the cycle. The overtone is Scorpio, and that's the one that's about to shift into Libra. In 2018, it will rise up before the sun in Libra. So we've had the last Scorpio overtone that happened in 2012. And so it'll be interesting to see how that shift feels. I'm kind of excited to experience that. And my Venus is in Aries, so it's a really powerful combination of Scorpio and Aries. Aries being the warrior woman committed to a cause. She's going to commit to and put her energy into something she really believes in. For me, that has been shamanic astrology, fiercely promoting and putting it out there, and, you know, just having a lot of passionate energy for that, which is also very scorpionic as well, and a lot of juice to it. So, and then evening star at the 5th gate, which is the throat chakra. And so one of the things that I've realized, because it hasn't always occurred to me, but that I've been writing celestial timings for 20 years. I've been, you know, I now do all these different things. And at one time when I was actually at my age 40 Venus return, I was doing a priestess process. And one of the things we were to do was to give a gift to the goddess. And so I gave my gift of writing or communication to the goddess. And then, of course, didn't really fully understand at that time that was the chakra gate that I was born into.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
and I've heard you talk about how there were fears about speaking publicly that you're overcoming these kinds of things.
Yeah.
Right? So think about reclaiming the throat chakra, folks. You know what I mean? That's going to be one of the initiations where Cayelin was born into the cycle. And the theme has come up in this conversation already a few times. I also have to point out, I don't know if this is going to show up on the video. I think it will. But there's this little glare on you. I'm guessing it's like your screen projected, but it's like a blue glow right on your throat.
Oh,
Especially, would you move your head just a little bit to your left? Yeah, there it is. Bam. Right? So the glowing blue throat chakra, it's been so fun. I've been like trying not to laugh about that this whole time. But, okay, so Scorpio overtone in the Aries goddess. So the Aries goddess, the fiery pioneer, the warrior woman, willing to put all of her energy into a cause, willing to stand up in solidarity at times, right? In service to Scorpio. So, I mean, here's this pentagram hanging on your wall. Like, what's the Pope think, right? Well, this is a statement of the power of the goddess, of the feminine essence. And I think the return to magic, which certainly I know you to be very tuned to, Shamanic Astrology, is the gift of giving the transformational keys to people in these times of their lives, as you're so committed to. And even this example of you kind of in that shamanic ceremony when this woman had died, and not at the only time of being the voice, throat chakra, in your kind of courage, Aries, to express like the deep grief and emotional essence for the sake of transformation, Scorpio shows up, right? So that's a really, really beautiful thing. And when I do this bit on like the historical Venus and moving through as this pentagram retrogrades, looking at how two of these points, Scorpio and Aries, that we've had came online at the time of the 19th Amendment. And traditionally, Aries and Scorpio were the signs associated with Mars. So there's something about the feminine essence coming into this exploration of the Martian energy to kind of courageously fight to retrieve not only her rights in this world, but also the power of the feminine to express the darkness, what's been taught to us to suppress for so long, of like the raw, true emotional experiences and excitements. Yeah.
And those emotions that empower us when we really allow ourselves to feel them from the inside out and let them express from the inside out. Sometimes people get a little confused because emotions and feelings are kind of interchanged, but emotions usually come from the outside in. We get triggered by something externally, and then we're emoting about that. whereas from the Scorpio perspective, it's really about feeling it from the depths, from the inside out, from the inside, and really feeling that deeply and being empowered by it. And that was part of the experience I had doing the grief ceremony, was getting huge Kundalini activation.
Were you in a Venus cycle then, Cayelin?
I actually I had just started my age 56 Venus return in it was in 2010, and my return was in 2012, but it was the end of 2010. So it was as that Scorpio cycle, and that was the last Scorpio cycle as well, just as it was beginning. So yeah, it was pretty powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting if she was where she was releasing the throat. It sounds like it was a little earlier than that.
Yeah, she was still in the underworld, perhaps.
And these are like lifetime statements, right? I mean, it's like a birth chart. There's so many different ways, I mean, I have like Sun square Saturn. So there's a million ways that thing can play out. And I can only do one of them my whole life and be like in victim cage with it, or I can get through that and join another one and keep coming through. So looking at Venus in your chart, Venus and Mars, these are amazing things to do. But then also this idea of what is Venus and who, as like a global goddess, is she in service to? Where is she at the quest? What is my kind of soul's assignment for this reemergence of the divine feminine essence? And speaking of that reemergence, I mean, two of the things that are happening historically with this cycle, I mean, again, I was born into the first Leo cycle, and you were born into a cycle where you will have the last Scorpio cycle, and that's gone down. What was that in 2010? That was the cycle we're talking about. And now coming up, the cycle beginning in 2018, when we start with heliacal rise, will begin in Libra. And what's your feelings about what that might mean?
Well, it's interesting because one of the things I feel about Scorpio, of course, it's also one of those very independent, powerful expressions of the feminine. And in fact, Scorpio feminine expression is something that was very much feared by the patriarchy, because it's such a powerful expression of the feminine. And it has a lot to do with magic and manifestation and sorcery, but healthy. When it's healthy, we're looking at the healthy essence of that. Because, of course, all the signs can have their shadow side. But, and so she was, really gaining her own personal power and expression, but now to take it into collaboration with the sacred masculine, to have that Libra expression coming from a very powerful feminine essence that isn't feeling like they have to be subservient to or less than in any way. It can be in a more conscious, equal partnership with the masculine. So it'll be really interesting to see how that manifests. I mean, we can see that it's been becoming more of that over time. That the masculine and feminine are co-creating, and from a place of greater, or I guess I should say more equal value, not the same. Clearly the masculine and feminine are different, but what they bring is of equal value. And starting to recognize that, whereas before there was a lot of repression of feminine power, which is very much epitomized by Scorpio. And the one that is like, well, we don't understand it, we can't figure it out, and we can't control it, so let's just try to, stamp it out. So
right. And then reclaiming that has required, again, some of this kind of Martian focus. And, when does that get out of control? Have we seen some of that happening? So in these shifts, like from Scorpio and Aries into Libra and Pisces, right? I mean, if we want to use the old ideas of planetary associations, it's like Scorpio to Libra from Mars to Venus. Aries to Pisces, from Mars to Jupiter. I mean, we're talking about a global shift that we are about to experience, and this is global. This is for all of us, and where you're born and into which cycle will show you how this serves. But look, it's the whole star that's shifting, right? So we're all participating with these global shifts. We are all every sign. We are all every cycle. This is an important thing to remember. There's this other thing of maybe we could say, as far as when we're drawing these stars, well, 5 points between the interior conjunctions, when Venus is in the transformational state, joining the Sun from the inside of Earth's past, and then the exterior conjunction in the middle of kind of this death and rebirth, shamanic death and rebirth phase. Well, that's a different star. But they work in conjunction communication in a way because, for example, the Capricorn Venus cycle in 2014, that's to 2015, had the underworld, the death and rebirth in Scorpio. And this current Leo cycle had the death and rebirth in Gemini. And the Aries cycle will have it in Leo, right? And so it's like this, where you can see them participating. And the cool thing about this, and again, I'll either show this later in this interview, probably in a whole nother thing, but the exterior conjunction points also shift. So we had our last Scorpio exterior conjunction, the place, like the signal place of the death and rebirth in the sign of Scorpio, which is maybe where you want that to go down, on October 23rd, 2014. It's the last one, I think, until 2177, something like that. It's a long time. And one thing that really spoke to me there and called me to this work, first of all, we lost 3 women in our community with Venus in the underworld in that time, September to December 2014. And that really called my attention to this cycle. And all 3 of them, water was involved in their death, and the exterior conjunction was in the water of Scorpio. And it was the last one. So I really felt, and I love the Sabian symbol for the degree of where this went down, which is the 2nd degree. And 2 days later we had that solar eclipse right there in Scorpio, right? But the symbol is the bottle of perfume lies shattered, releasing its fragrance, something like this. And I loved that so much because it really felt that in the just and necessary and beautiful claiming of the feminine's power and taking this back, that now we're waking up to a time of, okay, like, have we taken it too far into like false masculine world? the pantsuits and the leaning in and all these things, and we're ready to take it now into this gift of bringing back this power that the feminine knows that the masculine has a hard time accessing, which is beauty and fragrance and eminence and radiance. And I really feel that in the shift of the Scorpio to Libra cycle that you're participating with, even in the Aries to Pisces cycle. I mean, that one's going to go across the vernal equinox point, right? So that's got to be a very powerful thing. And it takes me back to your husband Peter's situation, right? Because he's born in the same cycle as me, right? Yeah. But he was born when it was Virgo.
Yes.
And now it is since in 1975 transitioned to Leo. So, you're connecting with somebody that's been through one of these transitions like you're going through. And just look at that experience that you shared of his mother hating men, whatever, right? Well, there was a lot of justification for that for a long time. And the Virgo essence of reclaiming the sacred space and the independence and that kind of thing. But then she transitioned into Leo. And he's at that place of Gemini and that playful energy we talked about that's also in charge of the death and rebirth of the zeitgeist of the cycle in general, probably to help it transition from one to the other. And so I was speaking about this with me a little bit, coming out of the woods as the priestess and coming back into, radiant, joyful play and cuddled puddles and purring and this kind of thing with Leo, right? And as you've probably, I'm sure, been a massive guide to help him make that transition. Here he is for you and your own coming up. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, as you're speaking about that, a lot of people have experienced a shift from one sign to another, and we're really interested in looking at how that's experienced. So does it mean that you still carry the original overtone and then you're just adding this additional piece now because that's where it's operating from, or does it just shift completely to the new overtone? We don't really know what the answer is to that. I suspect there's probably some of the original overtone was always there, and then we add the additional information to it.
Yeah, and is it ever just like a light switch? I mean, that's the cool thing about looking at the transition of these heliacal rise points, which happen a couple cycles before the interior conjunction point shift. In a way, you get to pioneer and move like probably through 2 cycles or 16 years of this transitional quality, right? So we don't just say, okay, that was cool for 100 years and that's over. Right. And the thing too is like all 5 don't shift at once because it's not a cross, it's a pentagram, right? So we get these pairs of shift, which is really intriguing to me. And that's something I've been meaning to address. It's really what called me into more of a historical view of the cycle. But I would love to think about a few things in this particular Leo cycle, given that the death and a rebirth moment, if we want to call it that. I mean, it's never a moment, but there is that time of the exterior conjunction, which was June 6, 2016, 2:47 p.m. Pacific, in the 17th degree of Gemini. And so Venus, Sun, Earth, Saturn, Jupiter, Neptune. And I'll show some charts here and show this Grand Cross, but for me, this is all speaking to these different planetary energies, perhaps that are assisting Inanna at this time of release and rebirth. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what you hear from Saturn and Jupiter and Pisces in that cross, or Neptune.
This is pretty amazing because if we look at these outer planets as teachers and guides, that they're helping to support whatever is taking place, and the most personal part of that is the Sun and Venus, right? So if somebody was born at this moment, they would have Sun and Venus within this Grand Cross. Saturn is helping to create the form that's going to support the intent. So whatever the intent is, we need to have a form that supports it. So that's Saturn's job, to do that. And anything that's in the way of it must come up to be dealt with, cleared, reformulated, whatever needs to happen in order for that intention to find its expression in our third dimensional reality, in this in this place of how we operate in manifest form, I guess is another way to say that. So that's going on. And then we have, and Neptune is about bringing in new visions and dreams. What are the new possibilities that are here? And that come from a field of all possibilities. So it's not limited to anything other than what we might limit from our imagination, from the perspective of our imagination. So basically it's whatever we can imagine. And Saturn's going to help to bring it into form. So that's pretty cool. And then we have Jupiter in Virgo with the North Node. And so that would suggest to me that there's something about bringing in an aspect of the sacred. How do we experience all life as sacred? How is that part of our destiny? How do we reconnect with the earth as sacred? And that, our relationship to the earth as sacred, and really bring that forth in a more conscious way and work with that in a more conscious way, especially through the expression of the divine feminine as the solar feminine, as the independent, I know who I am. I don't need you to know who I am. I can know who I am through my own accomplishments and achievements. It doesn't mean I don't want to connect with you. It just means that I don't want to be defined by you. I'm going to do that for myself. So that's strong, fierce, feminine expression. So a lot of support and help and assistance coming in from these this whole Grand Cross experience. Yeah.
With the cross, it's really a grand square. I mean, there's two massive oppositions happening, and if that, we can, in opposition, we can feel like we're being pulled apart, right? I mean, but put yourself in that yoga pose, right? It also brings awareness to your center, to your heart, right? Even if you are being pulled instead of pushed together, regardless, it brings the attention there to the center. And this is happening in this way and in that way, right? So right. Really coming into the middle, and the middle is Earth, and on one side it's Venus and the Sun. I mean, the new moon was 2 days before, super aligned to this cross. And there's other things about it. I don't want to get too deep into it right now, but I want to look at this historically too, that Venus was right at her node in Gemini. So we can't see this, but if she had been between us and the Sun instead of on the other side, this would have been a Venus transit. We're not going to have another one of those in our lifetime, but she's actually way more strongly aligned to her node than she was in 2004 or 2012 in June, at the time of her transits, when we could see her body in front of the Sun. She's also with Uranus' node. And that one is really speaking to me, because at this time, Uranus, for the first time since 1928, is conjunct Eris, the goddess of discord. And Uranus, who brings this revolutionary gift of change and fast lightning bolt change to the essence of discord. I feel like this is this huge part of this story, right? Do we have an opportunity to release that? Instead of Eris throwing the golden apple into the wedding to start the Trojan War, maybe, golden apples probably taste pretty good, so maybe keeping that for herself and then showing up in a beautiful outfit or whatever, And Eris and Uranus were very close together in August of 2015 when the cycle started, and they were trine to Venus and the Sun in Leo. So there's something about that conjunction of Uranus and Eris. And again, it hasn't been since 1927, 1928 that they've been conjunct. And I think you pointed out to me recently that where they were last conjunct was in these very early degrees of Aries, where the next Venus cycle begins, and which will be her last Aries cycle. It's also historically around that time of 19th Amendment and when the pentagram shifted into Aries and Scorpio. So all these wheels within wheels and themes come together. So another thing there for me was that Mars is retrograde in Scorpio now. And he's looking back, he won't go back to those degrees where Venus had her last death and rebirth in Scorpio in the 2014, but he's kind of looking back there and maybe bringing that sacred sword that cuts and saying, like, Inanna, I'm going to help you through this. But to maybe finish with the chart on this thread of, well, who did help Inanna, right? And it was Ninshubar. And before she went down, she told Ninshubar, if I'm gone for too long, beat the drum in the temple of my father, Inanna, and in the temple of Enlil, and the temple of Enki, if the first two won't help you. And the first two don't. And then Enki...
They're not going to interfere with the ways of the underworld.
Yeah, right. And I'm really feeling into this thing that they can't. But to say that Inanna is Venus and Ninshubar most likely Mercury, and at this time of Venus on the cross, which is kind of true to the symbolism of the story too, that Venus is in Gemini, traditionally a sign associated with Mercury, and Mercury's in Taurus, traditionally associated with Venus. So they're in reception. It's not a mutual reception because they're also in aversion, but this is reception. And it's really amazing if you look at, for you other, nerdy historical astrologers out there, if you look at the way and where Mercury and Venus find their conjunctions during the course of this Venus cycle, one thing that happens is Mercury will be up in the west just as Venus is beginning to descend into the underworld. And so Inanna going into the underworld, and Ninshubar is like, oh my gosh, I got to go help her out. And so he cruises retrograde, does his interior conjunction between us and the sun, maybe, bringing her help. And this is really fun too with this cycle because we had that exterior conjunction so close to the Gemini new moon. The Gemini new moon was as low latitude as it gets, so it's kind of down to earth, I think, or even kind of an underworld expression there, or reaching for it. But Inanna's father, Nana, is the moon god. He was later called Sin, right, in another neighboring territory, which is kind of interesting. But he isn't going to interfere with the ways of the underworld that you said. But I kind of feel like he can't go there, right? And the reason being is, like you said, the transformational underworld, right, is Venus between the Earth and the Sun. And the moon can go there. Right? We can have a new moon between the Earth and the Sun. But the Inanna underworld, or we could call it maybe the Ereshkigal underworld, the Kerr, is the other side of the Sun, where Venus is now. And the moon can't ever go there. Right? It's just not even possible. So it's like, hey, sorry, sister, I can't help you. As far as Enlil, I wonder, but with Enki, I really feel often that Enki, as god of wisdom, has these kind of Saturn correlations, and Saturn's not only looking across at this Venus-Sun conjunction from Sagittarius at the time of this one, but it's retrograde, maybe thinking about, oh, all right, I gave her my blessing, I need to help out. But he can't see her, right, because she's on the other side of the sun. And I feel Enki, too, in Enki's realm of the Abzu, is like the earth side of the sun. So when Venus goes through this transformational time of her dance, between the earth and the sun, the interior conjunction, I feel in the story that's when she's visiting Father Enki in the Abzu to retrieve the me, right? So he kind of lives on that side, and he's not going down there either. But what he can do is send these helpers. And so from the dirt of his fingernails, he creates the Galatura and the Cougar, and they go there to feed Inanna this bread and the water of life. And here she is resuscitated. And so here comes the queen, folks.
Yeah. Indeed.
So I've helped people choose wedding times often, and just for the first time I've taken that to the next step and ordained my first marriage. And it was a very wild Gemini marriage. It was on this date of the Venus exterior conjunction on a Grand Cross, and I think many astrologers would say I'm mad for advising people to be born at that time, but it had to be with Venus in the underworld. And I said, catch her in this alignment. The ancients called that Kazimi, in the heart of it. And I felt into this and really saw all these different helpers, as you expressed, and saw it as the midnight of love. meaning that just as we start our days at midnight, it's not like the sun has risen, but it's given us the promise that it will. And that we start our years in this depth of winter, the sun has not come back. We haven't had that resurrection when the days grow longer than the night, but we have this promise that it will. The sun has been born. And so the idea there, I think, is that the love will always be rising for them, always emerging. And I understand that you and Peter were married with Venus in the underworld too, right?
Yeah, in fact, we purposely chose that. It wasn't a Grand Cross. So I just want to say that up front. But Venus and Mars actually were in the underworld together. There's 3 different ways that Venus and Mars come together in the morning sky, evenings. They start out in the together in the morning sky, and then they wind up in the evening sky, or they start out together in the evening sky and wind up together in the morning sky, just depending on how. We call these the Sagas of Mars and Venus and Mars. And then there's one of those patterns where Venus and Mars come together. The only time they're together is when they're with the sun in the underworld. And so Peter and I were really clear that, because I'd had 2 marriages prior and he'd had a marriage prior, we wanted to create something really different. So we looked at that time as a way of it's like Venus and Mars are off the world stage. They're in sacred union together with the source of light and life for our planet, the sun. The sun shines on everything. So Venus and Mars are sourcing something new. It also just so happened that when we got married, they were at 28 and 29 degrees of Libra. The sun, Mars and Venus, all 3. I think it was Mars and sun were at 29 and Venus was at 28, if I remember correctly. Anyway, of Libra, so that, it's about how do we do relationship in a new way that really honors and values each person in the relationship. And that I wanted to do, so we also got married secretly, and we didn't tell people because we didn't want any of the old perceptions about marriage, good or bad, whatever people think about that, whatever their experience has been with that. We didn't want any of those overlays, so we decided we'd keep it secret for a year and a day till we established a strong field for ourselves. That was 10 years ago. So, and our intention was that it would continue to get better, because sometimes when people get married, it's like that's the high point of their relationship. And so we wanted to have something that would continue to get better over time, and that's exactly what we have experienced with.
I love that. Yeah, that emergence.
Yeah. So I would say that anybody who chooses to do that when Venus and the Sun are together, there's a if you have a strong intention that you're working with, it can be a really powerful time to get married, to create something new, to really source something new that is off the world stage, off the collective, belief system of what people think marriage should or shouldn't be, or is or isn't, or whatever that might look like. So.
Yeah, I was like, look, I don't care how this goes down, I'll do whatever. But we've got this 40-minute window for I pronounce you, right? Because I want Libra rising and this Cancer moon in the 10th. And that was the thing. That's so cool to see, too, where Venus and Mars were hiding out in the underworld when you guys had your hidden marriage to later emerge, because that is where your next Venus return will start. Right? As she transitions from Scorpio to Libra, she doesn't begin at the beginning of Libra, she begins at the end. So what a cool way to tie that all together, and maybe to tie a pretty bow on this interview. So
there's just one more thing I'd like to just speak to a little bit, and that is that because we talked a little bit about the morning star, evening star, but if a person is born in a morning star phase, it is a more youthful, energetic, Inanna is making her commitment to go to the underworld. So that so I think it was Dane Majar who said it's like adding Aries to it, the morning star.
In the morning.
And then evening star is after she's been through the initiation, she's she's had a powerful experience, and she's more Earth-like, more Virgo-like, more like High Priestess, than say the more warrior, I'm committed, I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to do whatever it takes kind of energy that you can experience in the morning star phase. And so that's something to just know. And I'd just like to invite people who are listening that Tammy and I are going to be doing a whole course on the Venus star phase. We're going to also be looking at the gates and Venus with the sun, Venus with the moon, Venus with the, when it means whatever ascendant you might have and how you can integrate all that information, as well as Venus with the outer planets. And so that's going to start on June 30th. And if people want to go to venusalchemy.com, they can click on classes and it'll take them to a place where they can find this Venus signature series that we're doing. So you can find out, by taking this class, you will know where you were born in the cycle, what overtone you have, what gate you might be at if you are at one, all these factors that really are also helping to define more than just the sign that Venus is in when you're born. There's so much more to it. So.
Yeah, and if folks are hearing this after June 30th, 2016, when this new phase of the Venus Alchemy sharing starts, you can still go to venusalchemy.com and sign up, and it'll be recorded, I'm sure, right? And people can get caught up.
Yeah.
And I imagine this is something the two of you will be doing long into the future. And then also, I've been in these Venus groups for the Leo cycle and for the Capricorn cycle that Tammy and Cayelin have been holding, and it's amazing. It's like me and 3 other dudes and like 80 women from around the world coming together and sharing experiences and supporting one another and teaching and learning. And we meet on the phone every month for an amazing guided meditation and just transmission about where we are in the cycle. And I really highly recommend that. So there's 2 different offerings that you can find at venusalchemy.com. One is going to be the evening star Leo cycle, and then the other is this phases of Venus. What are you guys calling it?
Well, we're calling it Getting Personal with Your Inner Goddess. But it's also, we're also calling it a Venus signature series. So it's really getting the full picture of what your Venus signature is through all these different avenues. There's 8 classes altogether.
Yeah, and I really want to support men out here that are listening to dive into this. It's really profound. I mean, in this emergence of the divine feminine, we're also often asking who is the sacred masculine. And I find there tends to be a little bit less response or understanding about the latter at this time, which maybe is a good thing. But how can we possibly support the solar feminine if we don't also call forth the lunar masculine? And the more that we men can get in touch with our own feminine nature, the more that we can support women who are getting in touch with their masculine nature. And we can do this together in a state of balance. I've been holding this Hanuman for most of this interview, is ripping his chest open to show his devotion to the sacred marriage of Sita and Ram. Right. And it's so fascinating, Cayelin, you just remind me too of like this unique thing that we share, which is if morning star Venus has a dash of Aries on her, well, I have morning Virgo with a dash of Aries. And if evening star Venus has a dash of Virgo on it, well, you have evening Aries with a dash of Virgo. And I'm born at the beginning of a cycle, and you're born here where one will be transitioning. So I can't wait to see how this transforms this world. Certainly at this time, we are ready for some peace. And I think this is one of the promises of the return of the feminine to her Libra study in a way. So may it be so.
May it be so indeed.
Thank you so much, Cayelin.
Thank you, Brad. It's been so much fun. Enjoyed it.
All right, well, I will see you in space. Check out venusalchemy.com, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Dance the riddle, dance the riddle.